Decriminalises sex between consenting adolescents was signed into law. This follows changes to the criminal law, that's the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill, which was adopted by the National Assembly last month. The revised sex bill states that children between the ages of 12 and 15 can consent to sexual acts with each other. Now, joining me in studio to talk about the revised sex bill and what it means for us is Shaheda Omar from child rights group, the Teddy Bear Clinic. Ma'am, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Sam.
Okay, just explain to us the rationale that underpins the changes that were adopted last month.
I think what's important to understand is that the age of consent has not been lowered. The age of consent remains at 16 years, and that the aim of this legislation was to protect children from being sexually violated by adults, which still remains. The important thing to understand is that by decriminalising this, it's protecting children from going to jail, from suffering undue victimization and stress, the secondary victimization and trauma that was induced to children.
Now, in 2013, the Constitutional Court found that Section 15 and 16 of the Act were invalid and ordered Parliament to amend. What was the problems with the Act and why was it deemed unconstitutional? Can you give us an example, maybe?
Yes, certainly. It was important to understand that at the time we mentioned the secondary victimization and trauma. Children, because it was legally enforced that any person who was aware of children engaging in consensual sexual activity had to report this. So your public health nurse, educator, even parents, if children were engaging in intimacy, any form of sexual intimacy, be it hugging, kissing, petting, they had to report it. So what actually happened was that children went underground. It resulted in an increased teenage pregnancies, HIV infections, STIs, the sexually transmitted infections, and children became more sophisticated in their modus operandi, not seeking any kind of guidance or support at family health clinics. Yeah. So it was more harmful and counterproductive instead of being helpful.
These amendments, what do they mean?
Well, it certainly means that the responsibility does not lie with the state now, that the punitive approach is not the correct solution, but it highlights the importance of the role of family, parents engaging with children, dialoguing with children, social institutions, and an intersectoral collaborative effort to ensure that children are enabled and empowered to make informed and positive sexual choices to minimize the level of risks and harmful effects on children.
Ma'am, one of the big things, and I'm sure a lot of parents might echo this sentiment, and I'm glad that you're here to kind of allay the fears. One of the big issues that this new bill is going to tell children, go and have sex.
Most certainly not. I think that's what we need to clarify and allay people's anxieties and fears around, because it's not giving children free rein. It's, again, affording children the opportunity to make those positive choices to ensure that they do not engage in risky behavior.
The fact that we are now putting the responsibility back into the family unit, back into the family circle, back into communities, and it'll be taken away from the courts, are we going to see parents having to step up now, having to have those maybe awkward conversations that they didn't want to have before, and it forces them to now know what is your son, what is your daughter doing?
Definitely, indeed. I think what one needs to understand is that a lot of research has been conducted, and we found that an overwhelming majority of children have indicated that they would have preferred to have learned about sex and sexuality from their parents. And that information was not forthcoming from parents. And a lot of children turned to their peers, to media, to other sources, which was not always an accurate perception of sex and sexuality, quite distorted. And I think this is it's actually a shift in the positive direction where parents will be forced to engage and communicate with their children. Of course, it requires a lot of support from government departments to ensure that parents are also given the opportunity to become parents, parenting programs, how to communicate with children, because that often is a huge challenge, and we know that sex and sexuality is a taboo subject. And people are at a loss on how to communicate with their children.
I'm so happy that you touched on that, because that was going to be my next question. Just any other ways, very quickly, 15 seconds, on how we can make sure that kids understand the role that they play, protecting their bodies?
Well, again, educators and educational institutions on speaking about risky behavior, safe and unsafe behavior, and enabling children to understand that actions have consequences. And of course, it could sometimes, if certain things are not followed through, if security measures are not put in place and children do not act according to what is expected of them, it could be catastrophic.
Shaheda Omar, thank you very much for joining me from Child Rights Group, the Teddy Bear Clinic, talking to us about the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill, which was adopted by the National Assembly last month. We take an ad break. You don't go anywhere.